Welcome back. In Gaza, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has now said that he wants his soldiers, it appears, to move into Rafah, which is the southernmost part of Gaza. He claims he wants his soldiers to evacuate civilians from that area. But at the moment, Rafah is housing 1.7 million Palestinians. Most of them are living in makeshift camps. They've been forced there, of course, after the Israeli bombardment of northern Gaza. As I understand the geography of that area, on the other side of Rafah is the border post with Egypt. Egypt has said it will not take Palestinians. Israel has had to deny claims it wants to depopulate Gaza, although some of its politicians have said that is what they want to do. Na'eem Jeenah is a senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Na'eem, good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. Firstly, the situation in Rafah at the moment. As I understand it, Palestinians have had no choice but to move from northern Gaza to the Rafah area, around, I suppose, 1.5 million people living there now. There's nowhere else to go, from what I can see. Where would they be evacuated to?
No, there isn't anywhere else to go. I mean, many of the people who are in Gaza now, in Rafah. So Rafah normally has a population of about 300,000 people. It's now over 1.5 million. Many of the people who are there, the refugees from further north, have relocated 3, 4, 5 times. So from Gaza City to Khan Yunis to some other place, and finally ending up in Rafah as the last kind of safe place, if you like. If they are, I was going to say if they are forced to evacuate, but it's just impossible because there's nowhere to evacuate to. It's the last place that hasn't been invaded from the ground. It's been bombarded, but there is nowhere to go to. The UN has said there is nowhere to go to. There's nowhere to hide. And Israel is doing this weird thing as well, where it's now calling on UNRWA to assist it to evacuate people. UNRWA has said that there's nowhere to evacuate people, and UNRWA also has been defunded by 16 Western states at the insistence of Israel. So it's really a kind of cynical PR ploy, but the result is that, already last night, about 170 Palestinians in Rafah were killed, including 7 of them in a hospital by a sniper.
Sure. Okay, so then, I hate to even have to think this out, but if Israel then does bombard more intensely Rafah, if it sends in soldiers, people, I presume, would try and get through the Rafah border post into Egypt, and Egypt would refuse to let them in. I mean, that would be the sort of terrible scenario that we're looking at.
Yes, it's going to be impossible for them to get into Egypt unless Egypt opens the borders. Egypt is determined that it will not open the borders, but let's be clear, despite what the Israelis said at the ICJ, the Egyptian border is in a sense jointly controlled by Egyptian government and the Israeli government. So all of the aid trucks, for example, that are going in, 100 or whatever it is a day, from Egypt, they get security checked like Gift of the Givers trucks, for example, get security checked about 5 times. 4 of those times is by the Israelis, by the Israeli army. So the Israelis do have control over that border as well. But the point is that from the Egyptian perspective, they know what happened the last time that Palestinians were forced out of their homes and out of their lands into neighboring countries, and that was in 1948. Those people and their descendants now are still refugees in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc., and they don't want the same situation in their own country, which in a sense is fair enough. To say that this is we shouldn't have to deal with an additional refugee problem. The issue is that Israel has responsibilities under international law which it's not meeting.
Netanyahu seems to be saying he needs to do this to protect Israel from Hamas. In other words, his justification for demanding that civilians be evacuated from Rafah is so that his soldiers can get to sort of Hamas people, Hamas members, I presume, Hamas militants, whichever phrase he's using, in that area. Is there any reason to believe that that's correct? I mean, would the Israeli Defense Force really be able to take action against these people in a way that would then protect Israel?
No, highly unlikely, Stephen, for two reasons. One is, of the 28,000, more than 28,000 people now in Gaza who have been killed over the past 4 months or so, only a few hundred of them have been from the resistance, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Popular Front, etc. A few hundred out of 28,000. So clearly that's not working. It hasn't worked in the rest of Gaza. It's not going to work in Rafah. Secondly, that the Israelis claim that they now control the northern part of Gaza and the central part. But last week there was an Associated Press report that Hamas police people in the northern part of Gaza, in Gaza city, which is supposedly under Israeli control, were marching looters that they had arrested. Marching looters down the street, or whatever is left of the street, in an area that is supposed to be controlled by Israel. So clearly, out in the open, where the Associated Press can take pictures of them, are Hamas militants, police, fighters, whatever you want to call them. Israel is unable to do what it claims is its objective, has been unable to do it for the past 4 months, and is not going to be able to do that by murdering more people in Rafah and bombarding them.
Is there anyone who could stop Israel? I mean, I know exactly where this is going, Na'eem, but I mean, presumably the only people who could stop Israel now, once again, is the United States. And if they were to continue to bomb Rafah, or to send soldiers into Rafah, or to somehow use military force and bombs to force the evacuation of civilians from Rafah, would that be a step too far for the Biden administration? Maybe, finally?
So a week or a week and a half ago, the Biden administration said that there shouldn't be an invasion of Rafah because it's the last place where people can take refuge. Yesterday, they said that when an invasion takes place, that the Israelis must ensure that there aren't many civilian deaths. So they've also changed their position. If they stuck to that position that they had a week and a half ago, to say that if you do invade Rafah, we will stop aid, Netanyahu will think twice. But because they've changed their position, there's no reason for him to think twice. All he has to do is say what he said this morning, which is we've taken, I'm paraphrasing, we've taken the American concerns on board and we'll ensure that there aren't too many civilian casualties. And just go ahead and do what he wants to do anyway. So yes, the Americans are the only ones who can use leverage that they have against the Israelis, but they seem determined not to use that leverage.
So the situation then gets more and more, it just gets worse. At some point, surely, in Israel, I mean, there seems to be no sign really of a proper conversation around this. Obviously, we know that Netanyahu is fairly unpopular at the moment. And the longer that the war continues, I suppose, the longer he stays in power all at the same time.
Yes. So let's be clear. I mean, there is a big protest movement in Israel, but in the main, it is not about the Palestinians. It's about the Israeli captives who are being held in Gaza. And so this morning there were 2 captives who were found in Gaza by the Israeli occupation forces and were kind of rescued. It doesn't seem like they were being held captive; they had escaped or whatever the case was. And so that from the perspective of the protesters, that's a kind of, and from Netanyahu's perspective, that's a kind of victory. He's now spinning that to say, you see, the way to get the captives out is to continue bombing Gaza, despite the fact that there's been a few score of those captives who have been killed by Israeli bombardment. But that's what he's going to do. So again, the only possible pressure can be from the United States. It's not going to come from internally in Israel because that pressure is simply about the Israeli captives.
Na'eem Jeenah, thank you, Executive Director at the Afro-Middle East Center, at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. I should be getting it right by now. Na'eem, thank you. I appreciate the time. Very, very serious situation, of course, in Gaza.